Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to all our speakers here today and our contributors, and very, very detailed submissions as well. So thank you very much for that. For Ms. ODwyer, I suppose you're representing the Education and Training Boards, and I know there's 16 of those. And it's only from being a previous board member on the Galway-Ross Common Education Training Board that I really begin to understand the breadth of activities that ETBs do. I mean, from primary schools to secondary, to further and higher education, you're involved in every stage of education. And I really appreciate the core values and the ethos that you speak of. I think is so important. And the diversity. I know that you've acknowledged, I suppose, the training that's been delivered through the NCCA and the PTST and the significance of school culture. That's the key one for me, really, is the significance of school culture. I suppose you have just acknowledged the online harassment bill as well that came through and the importance of that, particularly Coco's Law. I would like to ask you just a little bit about the empathy education programme I think that you mentioned in your submission. And I think that's Professor Pat Dolan you said you're working with from NUI Galway. But just if you could give an example of that. And I know that many of the speakers refer to the restorative justice approach, and I'm very interested in that. A question maybe for yourself, Ms. O'Dwyer, would be just in relation to identifying bullying. You mentioned that in your submission, and it was mentioned last week as well with the teaching unions. How do we improve the skills and abilities of all teaching staff? In fact, SNAs and everybody in the school environment in watching out for telltale signs. How is that done? Because that seems to be an issue. And then I suppose a question for all speakers might be just around role play. And I know I mentioned this last week, but how do we set it up so that people know what to do with an incidence of bullying, from how you identify it to who you can speak to within a school, to the measures that can be taken within a school environment, so that everyone's very aware and that it becomes very natural that if something is seen as, be it a bystander or, in any shape or form, what are the steps that someone can do or will do? For Mr. Jim Curtis, I suppose just a joint managerial body. I didn't realise 380 voluntary secondary schools. That's very impressive. I appreciate that you've mentioned that bullying is always going to be a challenge. You say that it's the response that matters. And I very much appreciate how you noted that it's school-wide. I'd be interested just on the anti-bullying ambassadors, if you could just speak a little bit on that if we have time. And then just, I suppose, you've noted that our workforce numbers have increased, and it's very true. We've reduced the level of pupils in primary schools from one teacher, I think, now to 25. With the last budget, it's been reduced by a point. So that's, I think, historically one of the lowest ever in terms of primary schools. For Mr. Mulconry, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I know that you're looking specifically at the Catholic primary schools, and you've mentioned a number of programs there, the Wellbeing and Friendship Weeks, Buddy Benches. You've mentioned that in the research that you have, that you've noted that parents are happy, and I suppose I would challenge that, because the research that was conducted by the Anti-Bullying Centre in conjunction with the UN, I think, in UNESCO, stated that like 1 in 3 children suffer from cyberbullying, and Ireland, in fact, is the highest nearly in Europe, I think out of 9 or 10 countries that they analysed in terms of bullying, and that probably includes cyberbullying as well. So I might leave it at that, and thank you very much, Chair. Oh, and just one last point, maybe for Mr. Mulconry, I think in the submission, I don't know if I'm correct, but you just mentioned that now wasn't the right time to engage with schools on this issue. And I suppose I'd just like to inquire about that, because I do understand that there's so much going on, but bullying is such a serious issue for us right now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Senator. And I'll move to John first, please, to respond.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much, Senator. In the context of ambassadors or bullying ambassadors, it's just a means, I suppose, of engaging with some of the older pupils in the school who might help and talk to kids, certainly when they come into the schools, and just telling them if they have any issues, to make sure to report it to, I suppose, the responsible adult. What we find actually is that if we have the manpower at school level, if we can set up form teachers, etc., if we can kind of give a few hours to people like our year heads, give extra resources to guidance counsellors, that especially in the early stages, that changeover from primary to post-primary can be quite traumatic. Yeah. And what we find is in the last couple of years, certainly we're doing more work, I would say, in that sphere, that the induction procedures that we engage in at school level are crucial. They're very, very important. And just to engage the parents in that space as well.
Thank you.
And I think that indicative programme that I referred to earlier does give you that sense of what's possible in school in the context of identifying behaviour, and that's key, and that's something I think that's evolving all the time. And I did listen to Stella O'Malley's engagement with the committee earlier, and I found it very interesting because in my time there was a gentleman called Brendan Byrne who wrote the books on bullying. I know it would have got him down to speak to staffs and parents in the schools I was engaged with. And Stella's language is very interesting around it, and I was taken by it myself because I'm learning in this space. Okay. I think this is the point, that all our school communities were still learning. That's why we need training. She was talking about being an upstander rather than a bystander. She talked, if it's mean, intervene. I mean, I think those are beautiful little epithets that we can use ourselves. So I'm learning in this space. And it's an interesting point about when is the right time for schools to engage with this. On one level, I could throw up my hands and say, look, we've been so busy over the last couple of years with other things. We just hadn't had time. But you're quite correct. This is crucial. This is so hugely important that as soon as we can, we need to re-engage with this. And it's just to create an awareness around it. Review the bullying, the anti-bullying policies we have. Look at the training we can have for our teachers. Look at outside assistance for schools so that when I, as a principal, I'm shaking my head, I don't know what to do, that there's some counsellor available. I know, again, the Ombudsman talked about perhaps having a counsellor available in each school. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But certainly some outside agency that you could ring and say, look, I'm stuck here. And oftentimes you need people to talk to the parents as well. In the context of the restorative justice, oftentimes the difficulty we have is talking to the parents of the pupils involved and getting them on board, so to speak, in the context of the solutions that we have in mind. So that extra ear, if you like, and that extra help, I think, would be hugely important for the system if we could get the structures around it and manage it in a proper way. Because, as I said, CAMS, I think Seamus mentioned earlier on, CAMS is just so difficult to engage with at the moment because of time pressure, and NEPS as well, because people are doing so many different things.
Thank you so much. Chair, I understand time might be tight, but if it was possible to come in again, perhaps on Deputy Farrell's time or Deputy Hughes, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I will allow the other witnesses 30 seconds just to respond to that particular question. So, Anne, if you want to give a quick response, please.
Okay, Aisling, you asked me about the empathy programme. And this programme was provided by Bernardo's for teachers. Teachers have to attend a full week's training, which I suppose just shows how important it is, the quality of the training that's provided for teachers. And then the teacher engages with either a family member or somebody connected to the school who has a small baby. And over the year, the baby is the coach. And the teacher, I suppose, is coaching the students to engage with the baby. And the whole idea is that they observe the growth and development of a small baby, and it develops their emotional connection and their empathy. Because we know what is the root of bullying, I suppose, is the lack of empathy. And this early intervention with particularly primary school children is about developing their empathy and their basic human kindness and their affection for the baby and their learning and understanding. And it has been, I suppose, there's evidence-informed research that shows that it reduces aggression hugely, and it develops empathy and it develops social skills as well. Whenever we've seen it or observed it in primary schools, everybody talks about it. I mean, the children go home and talk to their parents about it. The family engages with conversations with the children as well. And we hear back from the children, the teachers, and the families that are involved that this is hugely impactful for children. And we know that there's longitudinal studies that show that even years later, it has a huge impact on younger children. So I think this is a programme that we should certainly engage with.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Seamus, if you want to give us a quick response, please.
Senator, I think when you talked about us not engaging with schools at this time, you may be referring to a letter which I wrote on behalf of all of the primary management bodies back in February. So it wasn't a CPSMA position, it was a joint position. The rationale for it at the time was we were engaged in discussions with the department around reopening schools and didn't feel in a position to engage in a survey with our own schools because they had a lot going on at the time. It wasn't an unwillingness to engage with the issue.